Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're teaming up with our friends at DeepCrawl to deliver an enterprise SEO webinar. My name's Polly and I'm the marketing manager at Impression, and I'm joined by James, who is a senior technical SEO and professional services team member from DeepCrawl, Ed, a technical SEO consultant here at Impression, and Charlie, a senior technical SEO specialist at Impression. If you haven't heard of Impression before, we're a digital marketing agency with offices in both Nottingham and London, and we specialise in SEO, PPC and digital PR. We decided to focus on enterprise SEO today to address some of the challenges that SEOs and marketers face when managing a large-scale website. Each of our three speakers will share their tips to help you identify issues, and they'll be giving recommendations to overcome them and ways to improve or fix them. We'll be kicking off with Charlie. We'll then hear from James and finally from Ed. Each of the talks today will last for around 15 minutes or so, and there will be plenty of time at the end for questions. So if you do think of a question throughout the webinar, please do pop it in the live chat box just to the side of the webinar. Equally, if you've got a question but you prefer to ask Charlie, James or Ed directly, that's also an option, as I'll be sending their emails following this webinar so that you can contact them directly should you prefer to do that. So now I will hand you over to Charlie, who's going to kick us off. He's going to be talking through some of the challenges an enterprise website might have with Google Search Console and how to overcome some of its limitations. So Charlie, if you're ready, I see your slides are up there. Move you guys.
Perfect. Can you see? Is that showing now?
Yes, I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Charlie.
Great. Thanks, Polly. Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to be talking about overcoming Google Search Console's limitations. And what I'm really going to do is giving some tips on kind of when working with enterprise websites, the things you can do to get the most out of Search Console when working with them. So in terms of talking points today, the first I'm going to focus on is the key areas of Search Console that we as SEOs are looking at. Second, indexation. Third, the sitemaps. Then looking at the properties, how we can set them up. Then the performance tab, and finally enhancements. So the way that I kind of structured this is going through each of those points and really trying to give you some actionable things you can go away and kind of ways you can work with Search Console to make sure you're getting the most out of it, because Search Console is quite tricky when you're working with these kind of large scale websites. So a little bit about me first. So yeah, that's me there. I'm technical SEO specialist at Impression, 6 years in search marketing, kind of a failed web developer. So that's kind of how I got into tech SEO. Spoke at Brighton, contribute to industry publications. I think probably most importantly, if you give me a follow on Twitter, because I'm up to 144 followers now, so I'm getting pretty popular. So if you can give me a follow, that'd be really appreciated. So the first bit I'm going to start off with is talking through kind of the key areas that we focus on in Search Console. So first tab, performance. You've logged into Search Console. This is probably the first area you'd normally go to. So look how an account's going. So for big websites, this lets you measure performance over time. You can look at kind of the data over the past 16 months, and it has kind of a vast number of data points, which you can see along the bottom here, where you have kind of queries, pages, and countries that you can go and see for your website. You can see here, this is probably a classic kind of enterprise websites where you've got 3.5 million clicks, a massive amount of impressions. So we can see we're dealing with quite a large website here, and Search Console displays that information really well. Second is the coverage tab. So this is where you can see everything that's indexed for your website, whether that be things that should be indexed, whether they're things that you maybe don't want to be indexed. And this is definitely a really important part for large websites, because one of the issues we can consistently see is either index bloat, things that you want to be indexed, not being indexed. So this is kind of a really, really important part for enterprise SEO. And then the third part is enhancements. This is kind of relatively new and was launched, the new Search Console was launched a couple of years ago. So then here you can see any AMP pages that you've got. This is probably really important for kind of enterprise websites that do use AMP, and we do work with a few. The core web vitals, which I believe James will talk about later. Rich results your website has. This section is kind of constantly being expanded, and kind of we've got some accounts now that left-hand menu, you kind of have to scroll down it because there's so many different kind of enhancements that we've used in our websites. So I've set out kind of the three key parts of where I think that you can get the most out of Search Console. So now I'm going to go through some tips in each of those areas and kind of how we as SEOs can use that tool better. So first one being indexation. So this image here is for a typically kind of small website. You can see here we're looking in the coverage tab. If we look on the top here, they've got 157 pages in the index, 219 in excluded, and you can see down here that text might be a little bit small, but there's things like excluding the no index tag. There's 30 pages, that's fine. We probably tried to do that deliberately. Page of the redirect, I think that this website in question recently gone through migration, so that's old URLs being picked up and being crawled. That's completely fine. So I guess the point here is that this is kind of perfect for Search Console. There's no real limits on this. We're not hitting that 1,000 limit of when you go and look at an issue where you can look at 1,000 URLs of it. Here we're getting a whole overview of the site. We're not going to have to extrapolate anything to kind of look for any patterns there. On the flip side, when we have an enterprise site, this is where Search Console becomes a bit more difficult to use. So this is an example of the site I kind of frequently going to be referring back to. But this is a website that they use data sources from all around the world, and they put it onto kind of a big website and hope that it gets indexed. So you can see here, this is a much larger website, 3 million euros indexed. There's more URLs excluded than indexed, which I guess is a bit of a concern. And kind of one of the real issues here that we have with Search Console is that when you go down and look here, you see there's discovered currently not indexed. There's over 1.4 million URLs in there. If we click into that, you only get to look at 1,000. So clearly this is where Search Console can kind of start to be tripped up a bit, and it's something that we need to be a bit clever the way we work with it. So one of the main issues you see in Search Console with any enterprise website will be crawled, currently not indexed. So what this means is that where Google have gone away, crawled a page, they've had a look at it, and they've said, okay, we're going to not choose to index that page. Now, there's no way that we ever going to have every single site and get every single page indexed. That's kind of unrealistic. But what we can do is put a process in to make sure we've got the tools available and the processes to, have a real good idea of why these URLs haven't been indexed. And this is where you do run into that 1,000 URL issue. So, with this Search Console, it lets you look at 1,000 URLs with 582,000 of these being impacted. That 1,000 isn't really that useful. So here's kind of a process of how I'd usually go and approach that. So first thing I go away is export that 1,000 URLs, try and look for patterns in that list. So are they things like RSS feeds? Is it pagination? Is it kind of maybe a certain subfolder that we go through? Really try and look at that 1,000 and start to go through, get some patterns there. And then what I'll go away and do is create properties in Search Console relative to those patterns. So say if there's a certain folder that has some really that has 200,000 pages not indexed, I'll go away in Search Console and create a separate property for that folder. And what that means is you're going to have a laser focused Search Console profile that's only going to look at that rather than having to have everything else inside of it. And then after I've gone away and created that kind of second level property, what I do is kind of give it a couple of weeks to start collecting data, because it does take a while. And then from there, you get a really kind of good place to analyze and start to look on a per folder level of how those improvements can be made. Now, I'm not going to dive too much into kind of the improvements that can be made here, because that is a whole separate conversation. But, typically it's going away and looking at content quality issues, thin content, crawl bloat, that kind of thing. But hopefully going through this process, you'll be able to give you a bit of a better way to go through and do it. But you still are using Search Console, but you're just being a bit more clever with it. Second one is discovered currently not indexed. So this is another massive issue you see with enterprise websites, where that Google haven't even bothered crawling those pages. So they've basically said, okay, we know that this page, is probably these pages. We've found the links in a separate crawl, but we're not going to go and crawl them because you kind of might perceive them to be low quality. So it's a kind of a big issue across websites. I think one of the things, again, keep going back to, is that not every page deserves to be indexed, but probably in a website of, say, where you want 4 million pages indexed, if they're 1.4 million have been discovered but not indexed and crawled, then definitely there is some kind of issues there. And typically we can start to look at things like, is the content very similar? Can we go away and maybe improve the internal linking? And a bit of the approach to it's like a slightly different approach to the way I go and look at crawled currently not indexed. So the first thing I'd do with these is take that sample of 1,000 URLs. I crawl these using a crawler. My personal favorite is DeepCrawl. Go away and use that. So crawl kind of those set of URLs in DeepCrawl. Second, look at any kind of content or internal linking issues. So is that content really similar to other parts of the website? Is it thin? Is it things that we don't want to be indexed? Internal linking. So using DeepCrawl, Ed's going to cover this later, but is that how many clicks away that from the home page? Can a crawler even find it? Is it, linked from, really, really far away where a crawler never find? That's typical. We see something like that. And then the third part, what I do normally with these is kind of do some log file analysis. So we know those URLs, they're not being crawled, but they're being seen. But what we probably should do is also kind of get that second level of data where we can go away, carry out some log file analysis to understand if those URLs are being hit. And then when we do go away and make improvements, we've kind of got something to constantly benchmark against it, rather than relying on Search Console giving us that kind of issues from there. And just a point here, discover not index is something that I know has been kind of a bit of a hot topic in SEO, things kind of falling out of the index slowly. This is a really good thread here that John Muller put a comment in on the SE Roundtable, and it's him basically just saying, look, if you're taking lots of content, which is typical for enterprise websites, and just putting it on hoping to get indexed, it's from kind of, it's very similar, it's from a database, like the website I'm talking about today, then, what probably you should do is start to look at go away, maybe start to prune that content or go away and try to, how can we improve it rather than just hoping that everything gets indexed. So the second point around kind of the ways that we can work better with Search Console, so sitemaps. So fairly straightforward, but one thing that I often see not happening, and you can see on loads of websites now, is that where people aren't categorizing their sitemaps. So if you've got to pay a website of millions of URLs, it makes sense to a user, to Search Console, to a crawler, to start categorizing those sitemaps. We know that Google will find those URLs anyway, but what by categorizing the sitemap lets you do is that when you upload them to Search Console, you can actually go away and start to look at individual issues per area of the site. You can see how I've done this to the impression website. This isn't an enterprise website, but it is using Yoast, and Yoast does have some good categorization on it. So you can see there that's kind of what you'd like to achieve, but clearly they're going to be a lot larger when we start to look at enterprise websites. Tip 2, don't exceed more than 10,000 URLs per sitemap. That's fairly fairly basic knowledge, and you can see here this is an image from one of the clients that we work with, where they have they've split up all their sitemaps. You can actually use some indexes to get around this. So when you if you have those categories and they're well over 100,000, then it is worth looking at using sitemap indexes, upload them into Search Console, and actually on this next image you can see how that looks like. So when you've gone away, started to upload this sitemap index in Search Console, you can go away and look per sitemap how that's performing. So from here, I could go away and click that bar chart and go and see, okay, so say if it's Colombia, how are our pages that we have that are related to Colombia performing? How are they performing against another area in Search Console? I think that's a really useful part of Search Console that can really help your indexation. And then finally, something outside Search Console, but I think is a good thing to note, is that when you are doing your sitemaps, there is a lot of fields that are ignored, but what they kind of would recommend is using URL and last modification date. Obviously, you need URL because it needs to be there, but last modification date is really good because it basically lets you say, okay, hopefully that when Google are going to crawl it, they're going to see that page has been updated. It's not the be-all and end-all, but it's just something worth doing, and it does give you kind of a bit of benefit within Search Console. Third part is properties. So properties does seem fairly straightforward, but there is some things that you can leverage to kind of use it better for enterprise websites. So the first one is making sure that now Search Console lets you set up a whole domain property, not just doing that domain property. Also make sure you set up your other properties as well. So your HTTPS, your HTTP, your non-WWW, your WWW website. Because what that helps you look is what that helps you have, you can go and see, okay, has my non-SSL version started getting traffic? Do I have traffic across www and non-www? And as well as that, on the domain property, I've actually had this recently, that where subdomains have started to come in into the Search Console account for the main domain property, and it started to kind of dilute some of the data that I've got there. So it's just making sure that as well as the main property, you do have those other ones set up. And then for large websites, it's really important. You can see I've had to kind of sense this, but what you can do is go away and make sure that not just having that domain property, going and creating individual kind of properties for each area. This is an example of an international website that has a large amount of languages, but we would say here that, it doesn't have just to be a subfolder. It could be, like I mentioned earlier with the coordinate index, it could be a certain part of the website that could be 5 folder levels deep that you want to go and see. Is there any indexation issues with it? So there's some kind of good tips that you can do, how to do properties better. Performance, so kind of cover this tab at the start. Performance is a really powerful part of Search Console. What I always recommend is making sure that you use the filters available. Now, when you load in Search Console for the first time, it doesn't automatically add a location filter on. Now, I've been guilty of this before, where I've gone away and reported data back to a client saying, we're doing well, but these were an e-commerce business based in the UK. But actually, a lot of that traffic was coming through from America, because they had some content that was around the coronavirus that ranked really well and got into, I think it's Google News in America. And because I didn't apply that filter, and because kind of it's a large website that's getting traffic from all over the world, I kind of missed out on, kind of misreported that. So always making sure you use the filters that are available. Second one is for search appearance. Now, this is something that I've kind of only just recently started using, is where you can go away and actually go and filter the performance tab by the different search results that you can provide. So what this lets you do is go away, you can go and look at the total amount of product results that are getting views compared to maybe your branded results. And what this lets you see is, okay, I can go away and look at the CTR of all my product results that I've got when comparing that to maybe, my informational content that's got FAQ. And what you can do from there is go away and start to maybe pull some data points. And what you'll often find is that kind of maybe some of the product results, their CTR is quite low. So maybe you can look to try and improve that maybe through this kind of view. Enhancements, so this is kind of my final part. So enhancements is a fairly new part to Search Console. One of the kind of the new things they've launched is Core Web Vitals. I know James will be covering this, but in Search Console, what it lets you do is go and they give you kind of a nice line graph and seeing how the site's performing. Core Web Vitals are really harsh. They seem to score everything poor, which is, I guess, Google, you want it to be very fast, but this lets you it groups different URLs together into a single speed, so you can start to benchmark any issues with them. It groups into groups of 20, so you can kind of spot if there's any speed issues with them. It is quite basic at the moment. What I would recommend is maybe using this kind of Google Data Studio dashboard that is available, that they can you can add in your website and it will create it for you. So as well as Search Console, having this to go alongside it is really useful. And then kind of finally, one of the parts of Search Console I find really useful when looking at enterprise websites is the rich results on the left underneath enhancements. So you can see here, this is an account we've absolutely kind of used all the structured data available to us. So we've got breadcrumbs, FAQ, Q&A, review snippets, kind of almost everything that's available. And within here, it's really important just to go through and make sure you're going to start to identify, are they all valid? Do they have any issues or warnings? Because for an enterprise website, you don't want to go away and crawl maybe 5 million URLs looking for, or is all the structured data correct? Using this is a much easier way to do that. So kind of key takeaways from what I've gone through today. Search Console is great for websites of all sizes. It works really well for small websites, but with a bit of effort, it works really well for large websites as well, but it just requires a bit of setup because it is, it is an amazingly powerful tool. And then one thing that I see a lot of people doing is that as soon as kind of they get a bit struggling with the UI in Search Console, they'll go straight away and look into the API and feed into dashboards. But actually, I find that quite slow a lot of the time, and it can be kind of a lot of work and then these dashboards are really slow and responsive. So what I would do is kind of, try and get the UI to a lot of that heavy lifting by setting up properties, submitting your sitemaps, making sure you have it set up correctly before you start looking into the API. And then just some more information about some cool things that I found around Search Console. So there's the Crux dashboard that I shared earlier. Hannah Rampton has created this really great Google Data Studio dashboard that anyone can go away and use. And then finally, Google Data Studio template, which Google have released, which lets you kind of pull through any structured data, sorry, not structured data, Search Console information into Google Data Studio. Cool. So if I stop this.
Thanks, Charlie. That was great. Loads of useful stuff in there, and hopefully that talk's gained you a few more Twitter followers.
Hopefully.
Next up, we've got James from DeepCrawl. So I'll just add you in, James, and remove you, Charlie. So I'll hand you over to James. And James is going to be talking to you about how you can identify and fix common site speed issues and understanding the new Core Web Vitals. So I'll add your slides now. Perfect. Thanks, James.
So I unmute myself. That might help potentially. Okay, so exactly what Polly was just mentioning. How do we get to the bottom of that less than ideal site speed? But first, who am I? I'm James. I'm a part of the professional services team here at DeepCrawl. I've got 10 plus years in SEO. I live in Colorado, which is awesome. I'm a super nerd, and I'm very strong proponent of quality. And gotta talk about it here, because if we don't talk about it, then um, when will we? But most importantly, the most important thing in my life, I've got a 2-year-old daughter. She's awesome. She's probably the most adorable child that you've ever seen in your life. I may or may not be biased. I don't know. Also, I have a cat named January. If she doesn't jump up here right in front of the computer, it's going to be a miracle. My coworkers are very used to seeing me or seeing her in every single meeting, so you might as well just see her now. Okay, so let's really jump into it. Why should I care about slow site speed? The most important thing to think about, first and foremost, it's really about the users. There's lots of studies that show that for every second that it takes for a page to load, it increases the likelihood that users are going to bounce. So you want to make sure that you're doing it first and foremost for them, and then second, obviously, for search engines. It's especially important now that core web vitals are coming down. We need to make sure that we've got the site performance and we understand how it affects user experience. That's going to be incredibly important moving forward. So how do we identify the problem? Hopefully, this isn't how you've identified a problem. Hopefully, you've identified it long before this happens. But if this is how you see it, then this is a good time to really look into, what's been happening? Why are there so many fewer impressions? What's really going on with that speed that could be causing some of these issues to happen? So identify the problem. Charlie had talked a little bit about core web vitals. It's something that's already in Search Console, but it's something that Google hasn't really deployed as a factor yet, but it is going to be coming. So it's important to take a look and identify the places where you can make improvements to your site, and then actually start making those improvements now. That's going to be incredibly important in the long run, and so it's something that you don't want to put off, because once they do flip that switch, if you haven't been preparing, it is going to be too late. So make sure that you're doing it. So one thing that we can do in DeepCrawl is we can actually put in some custom extractions that will help us to pull in this data into the DeepCrawl app. And here what we have is we have it bucketed, right? So we've got it, the first contentful paint, the response time, everything. And this site's actually looking pretty good. Things are either fast or medium, not very much on the slow side. And so with this site, we wouldn't really need to worry as much. But if it was opposite, we would have to we'd want to start digging in, right? And so this is holistically, this is for the whole site. This isn't just URL by URL. And this is really where I would want to start for a larger enterprise site. I'd want to make sure that I was looking at the certain areas that we were failing first, and then dig into those kind of individually. So that's the next piece. So not only can we look at it by the whole site, but we can actually look at the PageSpeed Insights metrics URL by URL and kind of break it down. Now this one definitely has some issues. As you can see, the contentful paint is slow. Everything is slow. There's a lot of resources being loaded, possibly unnecessarily. I do want to say, don't necessarily, even though core web vitals are the new hotness, don't necessarily abandon the older metrics, especially not yet. While they're not something that Google is really focused on, it is something that can give you a good idea on where to go and kind of what to look into. So make sure that you're still kind of watching that. Make sure that that when you do kind of pull this together, that you start looking for patterns, right? So what I would do is I would take these URLs, I'd organize them like so, and then look for patterns. Is it all product pages? Is it all category pages? Kind of start bucketing them back together, and then looking at those templates, because that's where you're going to find your way forward. That's where you're going to locate all those issues that you can start to fix. And so that's something that's easy to do with DeepCrawl, and we can definitely help along with that process. So now that we know what the problem areas are, what do we do about it, right? So enhance, obviously enhancing, it's better than optimizing, right? Maybe. Anyways, what we have here is we have some kind of just like easy-ish fixes. I say easy-ish because while you can understand what to do, if you aren't a developer or you aren't a designer, it may be things that you do need to work with other teams on. But these can have sweeping effects on the whole site if you get this stuff right. So making sure that you've minified CSS and JavaScript, making sure that you've enabled text compression. You know, with most newer sites, you don't need to worry about that. It's taken care of. But what if you're working on an old site and you haven't started doing this stuff? Just make sure that's done, because that's going to help you greatly with your overall speed. Set up a CDN, especially if, maybe this isn't as important for local sites, but if you do have that CDN set up, that can also be another big benefit. And then optimize your images. Images are often something that's even still overlooked. People are talking about it more and more, and they're doing what they need to optimize images, but it's not always first thought on people's mind. And images can have a huge impact on how fast the page loads, because they can be super heavy. You may not realize that you're putting a billboard size image onto a site that doesn't need, something that large, until it kind of tanks your speed, right? So just want to also say, don't solely rely on compression tools. There are some great compression tools out there, and they do a good job, but you also want to be doing a check on your own. So after you've done something like that, if that's the route that you go, make sure that you run it through and see how large is this image. Is it still oversized? So with this site, we've been able to kind of pull out each individual URL of the image and then how big the image is. And as you can see, some of these are quite large. And so then we can kind of go in and fix. We can prioritize based on if it's a page that maybe people are actually hitting or not, and give it to the designer and say, hey, can you start working on these, replacing these images because they're too large. Also, don't forget about next-gen formats. WebP is the most widely accepted, but it's also not universally accepted. So if you do go that route, you need to make sure that you also have a backup for browsers that don't accept WebP. The major ones do at this point, and it's probably just going to continue. But just make sure that if you do go that route, that you've got your backups. And that's something that if you have a really old site, you can do maybe some of them and kind of work on them slowly. But if you've got a brand new site, you might as well go this route, because this kind of looks like where the technology is headed. So also, you can go ahead and you can look in the coverage report, right? So this is where you'd be able to identify some unused CSS, some unused JavaScript, and be able to kind of start fixing that. The coverage report is in DevTools. It's super useful. You can easily identify how much of any CSS file or JavaScript file is being used and how much is being unused. And from there, you can make determinations on, is this 100% unused? Well, let's get rid of it. That said, you need to be really careful, because if maybe a file isn't being used on this specific page, but it is being used on another template or set of pages. So if you just remove it completely, it could have a negative effect on those other pages. So, I don't know how many times I can hammer it home, but test, just make sure whatever you do, it doesn't negatively affect the rest of the sites, or the rest of the site, the rest of the pages. But that said, you can go ahead and you can look through here and you can see, okay, I've got all my templates together. I've identified what is or isn't being used. Let's just remove it. Work with your developers to reduce the size of some of these files, because you may be just loading in a ton of unnecessary stuff. That's not always possible with third-party scripts. And another place that you can locate that is here in the PageSpeed Insights tool. Here you can kind of see, okay, what is being loaded on the page. Make sure that you're not loading things that you don't need. Some of these can't be helped, like, you know, Google Analytics, that's going to be there. Facebook, that's going to be there. Tag Manager, you know, but what if you're loading something like an old chat feature that you used long ago, you've switched, and that script is still there? Well, now you know you can go remove it, and that can save you a little bit of time as well. So, you know, along with Core Web Vitals, Charlie showed one Crux dashboard that's really cool. This is another one that we use a lot so that we can kind of see how the site is doing with each of the either Core Web Vitals or even some of the older speed metrics as well. So you can see with this site, they're actually doing really great. They have larger sections of their site that are good with the LCP, FID, CLS, so they don't need to worry as much. But this is a good sanity check too. You know, why, or if they have too many or too much of any one, then that's something that you'd want to focus on, really. Also, Core Web Vitals, we can pull this into DeepCrawl as well. And so we can actually see URL by URL kind of how we stack up with these new Core Web Vitals. And then, like we talked before, we'd kind of break it down, look by template, and kind of better understand what's going on. And maybe it's specific templates that are really having the issue over others, and then start working on them from there. So just really quick, what are they? You know, largest contentful paint, it's all about loading. So this is looking at the viewport when you first go onto a page, and the largest element that's being loaded on the page. So that includes text, image, video. What takes the most amount of time to load? That's what this score is going to be. So you need to be aware of what you have initially and how long each one of those elements takes to load. And if it takes too long, maybe that means you should move things around. But that's really what that metric is focused on. Next, first input delay. Excuse me. It's all about interactivity. So sorry about that. My dogs, you can never control them. So what is the response time of the site after a user clicks on an element and then interacts with the page? So what this is it doesn't actually have anything to do with how fast the page loads, but it is, let's say that somebody clicks on an element that has to load some JavaScript. It's how long does this take for the site to respond after you make that click. And it could continue loading after the first response, but it's really that time between click and response that you need to be aware of. And then cumulative layout shift. What this is we've all been on a site where text will start loading, and then images will start loading, and then everything just kind of jumps around as different elements are loading. That's what this score is looking at. So you need to make sure that things aren't moving, that you have the elements fully blocked out so that things don't jump around. And that's really what the CLS score is looking for. So let's recap. What the heck was he just talking about? Honestly, I don't know. I may have blacked out as I was talking. But there's a few important things, right? So just like content, you want to make sure that speed enhancements should be done with the user in mind. It does benefit you with search engines, but really at the end of the day, you want the user to be the one that's engaging with your site. And so that's why you want to focus on them. There's a ton of different ways to identify speed issues on your site that we kind of went over. Don't wait. Make sure that you're doing regular audits, because you don't want to be caught off guard by maybe a new algorithm update or when Core Web Vitals become a standard. There's tons of factors that go into speed. We discussed a very few of the overall, but there's a lot more that's going on. And then also the Core Web Vitals. You know, Google doesn't often give warnings like this. So when they do, it's important that we listen and be prepared. So be prepared, be prepared. And thank you.
That was great. I still hear dogs now.
It's terrible sometimes. I apologize for that.
It could be worse.
It could definitely be worse.
No, that was great. Thank you. I'm now going to pass you over to our final speaker. If I just add Ed back in. Yeah, Ed's going to talk through internal linking for enterprise websites. Here he is.
Sorry. Cool.
Thanks,
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Yep, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Polly. Very good. Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to be speaking about internal linking for enterprise websites. Just a bit about myself. So very similar to Charlie, I'm a technical SEO consultant at Impression. I've been involved in the SEO industry for just over 10 years now. So I specialize in technical SEO and optimizing enterprise websites for search. Also commonly work with development teams to make sure that, changes can be implemented onto these websites. I write a few blogs here and there. The most recent big one I've done is the Amazon Prime UK fix, because helping billionaires is what we should be doing at the moment. But I also co-host a SEO podcast called Rank Up. So we are looking for guests for that show as well. So if you are interested, we are looking, for people from all kinds of backgrounds within SEO. So yeah, definitely get in touch with me on Twitter, or maybe get in touch with Polly, and we'll certainly be able to get you on the show and have a good chat. If you did want to follow me, I've also put my social handles in the bottom corner there. So today, why are we talking about internal linking? Well, internal linking is not only required for user experience, but it's also critical for search engine robots to discover pages. And I think internal linking can be a major issue for enterprise websites, which fail to provide access points and signals for search engine robots as well. So some of the things that Charlie discussed in the Search Console coverage reports, these can also be related towards a lack of internal linking, or from a signaling point of view, Google not being able to discover if a page is important or not. And then the final point as well is enterprise who are looking to succeed in organic search should ensure search engine robots should focus on the following. So ensuring that search engine robots are able to discover all primary pages on the website, highlight the importance of key pages for a user and a search engine robot, but also to build relationships between pages and drive contextual relevance for users and search engine robots to understand. So making sure that you're linking towards relevant pages from relevant pages, but also you're using relevant anchor text to describe for a user and a search engine robot what a page is about. And if you are able to meet all these kind of three objectives, what this will bring to the table will be the user experience benefits. Also, you'll be able to avoid crawler limitations. So we're not talking about kind of crawl budget here, but we're talking about where, search engine robots are actually finding it difficult to find pages across your website. So you're bringing them to, the table and being able and allowing for a search engine robot to discover these pages more efficiently as well. Also, page rank distribution as well. So allowing these big links that you may acquire to your websites, making sure that they get, the value gets passed over towards key pages that you want to rank well. But you're also providing contextual anchor text as well. So describing to a search engine and user what a page is about too. So to the first part, I'm going to discuss how to go away and analyze your internal linking structure. So the first one is I recommend using the crawling software. I've used DeepCrawl here, but there are obviously other search crawling software available, such as Screaming Frog and Sitebulb. What I would say is definitely identify initial internal linking issues before you start investigating more. So these can be things such as 301 redirects, broken pages as well. So you can see this site on the right is pretty healthy, but if you are noticing a large percentage of 301 redirects or maybe broken pages in your crawl overview, definitely prioritize these as well. So making sure that you're actually focusing on these first, because these will probably deliver the biggest success, and certainly worth highlighting straight away. My next recommendation is using a crawl source gap analysis. So again, this is using DeepCrawl again, but again, you can use other crawling software. The only kind of requirement for using this is that you need to have an up-to-date sitemap to make sure that this actually works. So if you feel like your sitemap is dynamic and it's including the bulk of pages across your website, what you can actually do is compare the two data sets. So compare a crawling software's data set compared to what you're submitting through your sitemap. So if you are noticing a large difference, there's clearly an issue with where a potential search engine robot can actually reach. So being able to identify the offset and then identify those pages in the middle where it's not being discovered, then it'll be equally important by focusing on those. The other area, again, using DeepCrawl, is you combining crawl data with either Google Analytics or Google Search Console. What you can do here is identify orphan search pages. So these are pages that have received organic traffic or visits on the website, but actually a crawler hasn't been able to locate with them in the crawl. So again, these have just provided another large data set of pages that haven't been discovered by a search engine robot. One of our other favorite things to do is using crawl depth as well. So again, other software, I'm using DeepCrawl's visualization here, but you can do this with another crawl software using, I think they call it like click depth and things like that. But I feel like DeepCrawl do a great job of displaying this visually straight away. So as you can see here, we've got 27,000 pages at depth level 6. So that's 6 clicks away from the homepage. Ideally, you really want your primary pages, again, this is dependent on an enterprise website, but ideally you want them to be positioned 2 to 3, maybe level 4. But if it takes 6 clicks to get to an important page, then clearly Google isn't going to highlight this as very important. And I think even most recently, John Mueller's came out and said, click depth is something that we do focus on over kind of a folder structure as well within a URL. So as you can see here, you can actually go into these kind of depth levels and see what kind of URLs are being positioned at this point. If you're working across an enterprise website and you're going to be dealing with, 100,000 URLs within these certain depth levels, then we use Google Sheets, but it may be worth using something like a BigQuery to look to extract this data. In order to take this kind of one step further, what you can actually do is start associating maybe keyword volume with URLs. So as you can see here, if we brought in the UK volume of certain pages across a website, and then we combine this with DeepCrawl's D-rank data, but also click depth as well. So what you can see here is actually pages that have significant search volume behind them, but actually quite deep within the structure of the website. So automatically you're able to identify areas of your website that are having issues with actually being located or positioned away from a search engine robot and a user as well. So you can certainly bring these to the table and making sure that you can position on the website in a more apparent space, mega menu or other areas as well. But I'll go into the next section around how you can actually go in and potentially improve these areas. And the final point is maybe using following on what Charlie was saying as well for Google Search Console. It's a really quick way to extract internal link data. You can go into links and then top link pages internally. It's nothing complicated within here. So I'd say this is probably the quickest way you can actually get that data, especially if you don't have access to maybe crawling software. But you can actually go away and export all your top link pages internally, export them to a CSV, and then again see pages that you feel are kind of devalued as to, it may be the priority pages that you're seeing that don't have that many internal links. But again, if you're working on an enterprise website, you're going to be having a lot of data there. So again, it may be worth using crawling software or using BigQuery to extract this data, because Google Sheets may struggle to handle it, but it's certainly worth using this. So at this point, you've done quite a lot of analysis, but there's even more you can do. So one of my final points is using log file analysis. So within log files, you can analyze most visited URLs by a search engine robot. And again, within this area, you can identify pages or areas of your website which aren't being visited often by a search engine robot. What I love to do within this area for kind of identifying internal linking issues is actually review by directories. And what you can see here is maybe if your website is structured well, like with categories or subcategories, products as well, you can actually see certain subfolders that have maybe not been visited as much as you'd like to, compared to some other key areas that are across your website. So once again, you can see here a really quick way of actually seeing events by search engine robots and seeing if you can further improve these, or taking away to the next step of actually going away and improving your internal linking structure. So next step, I've run through quite a lot there. So I think even if you did one of them, you'd probably have good enough data to identify a few issues. So there's quite a few steps that you can go away to kind of audit your internal linking structure. So if you did kind of run through all of those, you should be in a pretty good place to see if there are potential issues across your website and how you can go away and fix them. So yeah, following analysis, you were able to identify areas of this. So basically anything where a search engine robot is either struggling to reach or struggling to discover, or they may potentially be devaluing that area of the website because it's so deep within the actual website structure. Kind of the first area that I would recommend to focus on, if you are working on an enterprise website, you're going to have some kind of form of template that uses modules. So, for example, with e-commerce websites, you're probably going to be relying on kind of categories and subcategories that provide internal links to products or additional subcategory pages. So it may be like some other big website as well that provides large data sets, but I imagine you probably use some kind of directory to list all these pages. So I guess the first one is auditing your website templates to see what you can actually do to these to expand them even further. So that's potentially introducing new internal linking modules, which help open up your website for users and search engine robots. And the thing is if you look to address this and introduce new internal linking modules towards these areas, it's a kind of a really easy way to get into, but also it's super scalable as well. So I think TransferWise do this particularly well. I think they've got over 2 or 3 million pages on their website across international markets, but they do a really comprehensive directory listing of all their countries. But once you start getting into the countries, that starts linking into different areas as well. So it's making sure that each page is being linked to and reached from Google's perspective or any other search engine robot. So I'd say the first protocol is kind of investigating your website templates and understanding your internal linking modules that sit across your website. The next point is going into pagination, and Adam Gent of DeepCrawl did a great report on the state of the web where he looks into like search-friendly pagination. And as you can see here, he analysed some of the top websites on the internet and noticed that 65% of them didn't have search-friendly pagination. What I would say with pagination is that they won't deliver super valuable links towards your pagination, but they will create important access points for search engine robots to discover new pages across your website. So I think a lot of e-commerce websites get this wrong, and it was kind of proven by that report as well. So I think the most common area that I do see is actually a category page canonicalized towards, say, for example, page 2, page 3 within a category page is canonicalized towards the main category, which effectively ignores all internal links on those following category pages. So again, these paginated components won't act as high authority internal links, but at least they'll give an access point. So what I would recommend to actually open up your pagination and allow Google to go away and crawl and index it. I've actually wrote a bit more on this topic, so I don't have time to go into it now, but I've put a link to it in there. But if you search, I think, pagination 2020 in Google, you'll see the blog post of my recommendations of how to open up pagination and how to optimize it. Also, in previous webinars where I've discussed pagination, a few people have asked me on recommendations on who does it best. So I think New York Post, so nypost.com have a really solid pagination, and you can see it indexing. And then also ASOS from an e-commerce website perspective as well. So these allow, these are both different types of enterprise websites, but they allow Googlebot to both go crawl the pagination and index areas of their website. And kind of the next point is breadcrumb structure. So I think it's a given across a lot of e-commerce websites or a lot of large websites that allow this, but it's such a quick, simple way to get internal links and establish some kind of hierarchy. So Google loves kind of this structured data, loves this kind of structure because it allows to identify that kind of hierarchy of pages, but it allows you to obviously create display URL paths within Google search as well. I guess the benefit of this, it also provides keyword-focused anchor text to categories or subcategories, and also it provides internal links at scale. So if you get this delivered across a large website, you see an influx of internal links across important categories and subcategories to really develop that hierarchy as well. And also it's great for user experience as well because they're able to flick through certain category pages as well. The next point is around kind of guides and blogs. So again, if you do have a content strategy on your enterprise website, so if you're investing content in, say, for example, informational guides or buying guides, or you have a blog that looks to, promote, related items that you're currently selling or promoting, or, services that you're promoting, I'd look to recommend to start introduce them within here. So you could do this through automation. So you could automate by introducing a new internal linking module which will provide internal links to relevant pages. So, for example, if you start talking about headphones, it may display a promotional box that lists, your 5 best-selling headphones, or there's categories related towards that. And then over time, if you continue to invest in your content strategy, you should start to really build a lot of strong internal links towards, pages across your website. So this will be kind of an evergreen approach to stably building links across your website. The other one is, again, a popular option, and that's related services or products. So provide related items. So I think e-commerce websites nail this. So obviously when they have like the model screenshot, they also display popular products or products that the model is also wearing as well. So you can certainly look to cross-sell and upsell for for buyers that are looking at, but it's also scalable for service pages as well. So I think Trainline within the UK do a great job. So they rank well for certain journeys. So for example, trains from Nottingham to London, say for example, but they've got this information page, but towards the bottom of it, they also internally link towards other journeys as well that you can potentially be interested in. So great for users potentially to look to other options, but also great for obviously search engine robots to discover these pages as well. And just kind of a final point. So I haven't really touched upon kind of external links, but just to kind of end on that, if you did want to kind of identify the areas that have a lot of authority, because it may be that they've got a lot of big backlinks from elsewhere, and use tools such as like Ahrefs and identify your power pages by link. So I've used Argos here to identify pages that have quite a lot of referring domains pointing towards them. So you could potentially, once you've identified areas that are having issues, and you may think of internal linking structures or different ideas that you can introduce to certain pages, this is the areas that I think will provide most value towards to introducing them on. So it may be a certain category, it may be a buying guide that got featured in certain publications. Introducing internal links within these areas will certainly help provide distribute that authority towards these pages as well. So you can use a tool there. So that's kind of a quick win to identify pages that hold the majority of authority on your website. So yeah, just kind of some final points. So what I'd say is identify areas and valuable pages on your website which are hard to discover, and begin focusing on these. Introduce new internal links which start to open up and promote these areas and pages. And also, I believe internal linking structures that are scalable, provide context, and aid user experience should be the priority. If you did want more information, similar to Charlie, I've listed some kind of resources that have helped me over the years. So I think Creating Effective E-commerce Information Architecture by Jamie Alberico was at the Search Love 2018, but that goes into more information architecture, which I think will certainly help. That should be your first protocol before internal linking. So that's really helped me. But Kevin Indig has most recently created a big guide on internal linking for SEO as well. So this goes way more in depth. So highly recommend checking that. And then I think this guide focused more on kind of the anchor text side of things. So build internal links for SEO wins by Andy Drinkwater as well. So highly recommend checking those resources out if you have time. Thank you for watching today. Just put my handles there. So if you do have any questions after this, or you can ask them in the chat. If not, you can follow me on Twitter and ask me anything there. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks all. Thank you very much for putting the time in today to get your. We haven't answered any questions through. As I mentioned earlier, if anybody thinks of a question after this webinar, you'll have the opportunity to get in touch with Ed, James, or Charlie directly. I'll be sending out an email probably tomorrow with their contact details on. There will also be the opportunity to rewatch this webinar, and we'll also share the speaker slides so that you can get your hands on those resources at the end of the presentations. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us today, and thanks to our speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.